Missiles, one of the most fierce weapons of mass destruction, have protected this nation and its citizens for decades. They shield us from threats, enemies, and any entity that stands against national security. The advancement of technology has made missiles one of the most powerful weapons in the world. But every missile fired from American soil takes a serious hit on the financial strength of the military. A team of systems engineers have designed a low-cost anti-missile missile that will continue to protect the nation without posing significant financial burden on the military.
My name is Chris Reddick, and our group is here today to present our proposal that we'd like to submit for the AIAA Anti-Missile Missile Design Competition. We believe that we've come up with a concept that can deliver on the requirements and the engineering capabilities for a very affordable price, actually less than what would be spent on a used car in today's market, under $10,000. So without further ado, we wanted to break down kind of our understanding of the current context and kind of the current need. To us, it's really driven by two different pillars, one being the kind of widespread utilization and proliferation of low-cost offensive weapon technology, such as drones and UAS, unmanned or uncrewed aerial systems, modified retrofitted cruise missiles, things like that. So the combination of that plus the cost disparity of actually how expensive our current intercept options are, and we'll break both those a little bit further down. So as I said, really there's been a widespread increase in utilization of these low-cost technologies. On the left shows kind of the rise of drone technology and how it started with the technology development without regulation in place. Obviously, it moved into the commercial sector and finally into military application. On the bottom right, demonstrates all the recent really conflicts in the last 15 years have all featured this type of technology in some fashion or another. So it really is increasing in terms of its utilization. As I said, the problem really is the expensive price of our current intercept options. So the chart on the left is the U.S. military's current intercept missiles, and that average unit cost is in thousands. So really the lowest cost of our current options is several $100,000, with options over the $1 million range as well. Not pictured here, but really kind of serving as the benchmark gold standard is the Iron Dome Tamir missile. And that's estimated to cost around $50,000 per missile. And as I said, I believe that we can deliver on what's required for a fifth of that price. So obviously we needed to understand the competitive landscape, and we started with the European IRIS-T missile. It actually has good system performance and capability. However, it does start at that $500,000 price range. Next, we looked at the Italian ASPEED. It has decent capability. It does have good speed and success rate, and the production capacity certainly is there, but it's still right around the $100,000 mark. I already mentioned the Iron Dome Tamir at around $50,000. Pretty obviously a good kind of baseline to benchmark against, but it does have some limitations in terms of speed and coverage. And then finally is the British Dragonfire. So this is a directed energy weapon. So the cost per unit shot is actually pretty low, but one problem is there is a high cost of initial capital investment required, and there are some limitations in terms of visual range and target size as well as power consumption, and it's really not currently a technically viable solution, still in development. Next is kind of a concept of operations of what our design plan took into account and how it would be utilized in the field. So pretty standard in terms of a missile intercept sequence. So first kind of the threat identification and discrimination, and then moving into the launch phase and obviously mid-course guidance, eventually at stage separation from the kill vehicle, and then terminal guidance, bringing it into either target intercept or self-destruction as required by the requirements. And so next, I think we're going to move into kind of our understanding and decomposition of the requirements and the engineering metrics that we're measuring against. And then eventually we'll move into our specific design concept and demonstrate why we believe our option is really the best one out there. So I'm going to hand it off to Jackie. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. So we've been talking about how we're going to deliver to you a low-cost interceptor at less than $10,000 per unit. And if we care so much about the price, I think it's important that we establish value. So that starts with the AIAA Request for Proposal, or RFP, which outlines the need and the requirements for this low-cost anti-missile missile. And from that document, we're able to create our own 16 system-level requirements that you see on the left side of the screen. And now that we have those requirements, let's dive into better understanding the missile that we're going to be creating. And that leads us to the physical decomposition of our system. You can see this block diagram showing our missile at the top, broken down next into our subsystem level, where we've identified 11 subsystems that will be physically on our missile. And we zoom in even one level further into our propulsion subsystem, where we show the components of thermal management, thrust vector, thrust generation, propellant, and ignition. Now that we've created our physical decomposition and combined that with our requirements, we can get a requirements decomposition. We can see the same framework of system level, subsystem, and component level. At the system level, we have three main requirements. That's the development timeline, that's also the production rate, and most importantly, the cost per missile, which again, we are designing this to be under $10,000 per missile. Moving down into the subsystem level, we've identified 4 subsystems which will encompass the majority of the system level requirements. That is communications, a launch platform, a payload subsystem, and a propulsion system. We've gone again one level further and looking into first the payload subsystem. We have 3 derived requirements from that. That is the success rate. We know we need at least a 90% success rate in this actual defense missile. We also need error tolerance, so we need our missile to be able to successfully intercept even with at least a 5% error in the data coming from the battle management system. Finally, we have a threat sizing requirement where we identify the need for our interceptor to be able to handle a wide range of threat missiles, and we've quantified that in this requirement. Then I want to note that from our success rate requirement, we are able to actually derive another level of requirement, and that is the need for a self-destruct system. We recognize that if we have a 90% success rate, then there will be some failed intercepts, and we need to be able to have a self-destruct system in the case of that failed intercept. We've gone into the same level of detail for the other 3 subsystems and derived requirements from those down to the component level, as you can see here for the propulsion subsystem, communications subsystem, and the launch platform. But now that we have our requirements and we have our system breakdown into the system, subsystem, and component level, that's the what. That's what we need to do. Let's get into the how. And that involves generating feasible alternatives. So we start with our morphological matrix, and this matrix basically breaks down our system, as you can see on the left, into our subsystems, and we've identified alternative design points that we could choose for each subsystem. This shows the entirety of the design space that we have at our hands to explore and optimize our own personal design. And from that, we've taken historical data, we've taken our competitors' designs, and we've taken standard practices to generate a baseline vehicle. From this baseline, we're able to then create our further optimized design and start from this point. Now, again, we know that we're trying to give you a revolutionary concept, and that's this low-cost missile. It's at a cost that we've never even seen before on the market, and so we know that that's going to take some interesting design choices that have not been done before. And from that, we know we're going to have to look deeper into this and do an evaluation of the alternatives. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to David.
All right, thank you, Jackie. I am David Llorente, and we are going to see how to evaluate some alternatives. So, starting from the morphological matrix, we are going to borrow some alternatives from the navigation subsystem too, because they both, guidance and navigation, are very similar in function and in composition. We're also going to get rid of some alternatives that we know won't meet some of the criteria. We picked the guidance subsystem because it is one of the most critical systems on the missile, as it is the way it tracks and hits the target. Due to the high quality needed, it is also the biggest driver for cost per unit. And being the cost of the system the major requirement from the stakeholders, a trade study is necessary to determine the best option within budget. Main metric will be the cost per unit and will have the highest relative weight. Integration with other subsystems is also to be evaluated, so synergies can be studied and the overall system cost reduced. Let's see first the alternatives. We will consider inertial, which is a small and cost-effective solution, radio frequency, active radar, which is normally assisted by ground-based radar, GPS, infrared. In the command guidance alternative, the tracking is done by an outside system that sends the orders to the missile. And finally, optical sensors. Let's look now at the evaluation criteria. Most important metric is the cost per unit, and we have the highest weight. The rest of the evaluation criteria have the same weight in the analysis, except for those which directly or indirectly affect the cost per unit. Those are the technological maturity, because we want it to be ready to use in the system and it can be integrated with other subsystems that would affect the initial R&D cost, and the integration, because that can reduce the cost of the entire system. Note that some of the evaluation criteria directly come from customer requirements, while others are relevant only at the subsystem level. Cost and accuracy offer most possibilities for trade-off in the QFD correlation matrix too. We're going to use TOPSIS as our decision-making tool because it is able to handle a mix of quantitative and qualitative criteria. It can evaluate many alternatives simultaneously, and it gives a clear and objective ranking in the alternatives. Our quantitative criteria will be cost, weight, size, intercept range, and the qualitative criteria will be accuracy, whether or not it reaches the 90%, technological maturity, whether or not it reaches the TRL9, and the integration with other subsystems that can be high, medium, or low. So now we put all of our data in the tool, the weights, the values with their units, and for the qualitative criteria, according to the methodology, we have established a value scale of 9 for high, 5 for medium, and 1 for low. The TOPSIS analysis identifies the inertial guidance subsystem as the best choice. Results are clear, no further evaluation is needed. Note that the infrared can no longer be considered because it doesn't meet the 90% success rate from our requirement decomposition. Now we can see a proposed design with a high-level detail of the subsystems. In a general view of the missile, we can see how the subsystems are distributed. The structures subsystem takes all the system because it covers it. Electronics bay will contain all the subsystems that are electronics. Payload bay will contain the payload subsystem, and the propulsion bay will contain the propulsion subsystem. First, here we can see the electronics bay containing all the electronic subsystems. According to our TOPSIS analysis trade study, the guidance subsystem will be inertial. Here we can see how the propulsion subsystem is depicted into two components. Now, Siddharth will give us some briefing about how to get ready for validation and verification.
Thanks, David. So for validation verification, we took all our functional requirements and defined what verification is most appropriate for it, what allocation fits the requirement, and the success criteria that determines whether the requirement has been met. So we had 4 different types of verification methods labeled by their initials. The I stands for inspection, A for analysis, D for demonstration, and T for testing. So for example, with ground coverage, we want the missile to be able to cover a 50-mile protected radius. And so the verification method that we felt was most appropriate is analysis and testing, because we felt that those methods would most effectively and directly address whether the requirement has been met. And so the allocation that fits this requirement is the vehicle as a whole, and the success criteria is that the missile should be able to cover a protected radius greater than or equal to 50 miles to effectively address this requirement. So we created similar definitions for all the other functional requirements, ranging from launch state to even communications and even production characteristics. Next, we created our risk matrix, where we defined all the potential risks that could come up for this missile. And so the way we define is that each risk has a source, meaning where the risk comes from, the likelihood of that risk for happening, and the consequence of if that risk happens, and what sort of mitigation strategies we could implement to prevent the risk from happening in the first place. So for example, we have one risk that the missile may not be able to destroy threats of all sizes within the defined range of dimensions and masses. And so the source for this risk could be the design of the missile, their design process. And the likelihood, we determined that while the likelihood is low, it's not completely impossible, so a value of 2 out of 5 felt most appropriate for this risk. But we knew that if this risk ever comes through or happens, it has a pretty big impact, because it kind of affects the reliability of the missile in terms of what size of threats the missile can destroy. And so the mitigation strategy that most effectively addresses this risk is by thorough testing and evaluation and exposing the prototype of this missile to different operational environments. And so similarly, we came up with other risks and defined their sources, likelihood, consequences, and even mitigation strategies, for example, such as the operational capability to even accuracy risks. And so we took those risks and put this on this matrix diagram to get an idea of how important some of these risks are. So the main takeaway is that most of our risks fall in the medium level or high level category. And so while all these risks are important to address, we know that the high level risks have a higher priority and should be taken into account a little bit earlier than the other risks that fall into the medium category, for example.
This team of systems engineers have designed a revolutionary missile concept that will defend the United States and its allies against large-scale missile attacks. As the size of missile salvos grow, it is crucial to reduce the cost of interceptors to maintain affordable defense solutions. And these engineers are providing you just that, a low-cost anti-missile missile that will protect you and your loved ones.